Hello everybody, thanks for tuning into the Help Center. This video is going to be on adding categories, adding groups, and adding fields. We will cover how to edit things once they're already created in a different video, but this video will be primarily focused on the initial creation of things. With that being said, let's get started. So in the top right, you can see that I'm logged in. I'm logged into a test user. For you, this should say your Rusted Gate email. If you're not logged in, it will prompt you at the top right, and these buttons won't work unless you're logged in. So let's begin with categories. So categories are the highest level of classification. They're generally used to just create these layers to organize things. It's really simple. It's just one thing. It won't let you enter duplicates, so I think we already have cattle, so it's not going to let me do that. But I could still do, for the sake of the video, I'll just do test, just so we can keep on moving. So now there's two ways you can navigate. You can either use this back button, or there's a nav bar on the right that can take you to whatever page you'd like. So let's move to the group. Groups are the subdivisions below categories. So these are going to be a little bit more specific. They're the overall thing that you want to collect data on. So under groups we have, or under our categories, sorry, since every group fits in a category, we have produce, cattle, hay, and test. So if I click on produce, I could add whatever's underneath. This could be like tomatoes, Roma tomatoes, lettuce, iceberg lettuce. You can get as specific as you want, but you want each one of these to be like an actual thing that you want to collect data on. So just for the sake of the video, we'll continue with this little test thing. So I do test group, add group, and then I'm going to add another one just because I think we'll want to use it later. So test, add test. So now I've added two groups to our test category. So I'm going to use our nav bar and I'll go to fields. So fields are what you want to collect about a given thing. So these are, when you're on pen and paper, these are your columns, and that's the way it'll show up in tables as well. So fields have to belong to individual groups. Unfortunately, the initial setup might be quite a bit because you do have to enter fields for every single thing that you want to collect data on. So let's start with we can show some examples. So I have produce. You can see that I have lettuce and tomato. You can also see if I do test, these are the ones that I just added, test group and test. There's no fields for these, so we shouldn't have any issues. But there's a few rules with fields. So you're not allowed to have duplicate fields for the same group. That just wouldn't really make sense. There's also an option to add a field to an entire category. So it'll add it to each individual group. This is not going to be very useful beyond the initial setup. However, this may save a ton of time if you have, my best example would be produce. So you're probably collecting some weight or amount for a ton of different produce items. Well, if you put all those produce items in as groups in right away, then you could come in here, click add field to all groups in this category when I select produce, and then the group won't really matter if you're checking this. Then you could add weight or amount and it would add it to the whole category. Now, that being said, it will prompt you with some errors if that field already exists and then you're trying to add it to the whole group after. It's because if you're adding it to the whole group, we want it to be the same. So it's going to require the field type to be the exact same as one that already exists. But in general, that won't be a very big deal. There's only a few different field types, which we'll get into as I move through. So if I begin with test, then I have a little test group, and then I'll add amount, just as a field name. I highly recommend using units. These will show up when you're entering data. And it will help prompt whoever's actually entering the data what the units they should be using. It is optional though, and if you are adding a field and you enter and you're adding it to the whole category, like I said, there's some rules here because things have to be the same. It's going to use whatever units was already in that field, if it already existed. If it didn't exist, then it's going to use whatever you enter here. So we'll just do LBS for pounds. And then here's the field type. So there's 4 field types. There's number, text, true or false, and this says enum. In the future, this will say drop down, but they are the same thing. So beginning, it's important to note that these can't be changed later, so it's really important to think about what you're actually entering. So if it's an amount, it's obviously going to be a number. If it's a tag and there's numbers and letters in that tag, then you should choose text. This matters because when you're entering data, it's going to change the field that is prompted. It's also going to change where it's stored on the actual database side. But if you choose a number, it's not going to allow you to enter any text. It's only going to allow numbers. True or false will show up as like a checkbox. Text will allow you to enter whatever you want. So this is the broadest choice. However, I will say that it's important not to just choose text as like a backup option. It's important to think about this because when you go to search, if you choose text and you realize that, oh, really, I'm only entering numbers, well, now that you've chosen text, you can't do a search that's like greater than or less than something. You have to use a number for that. So then that brings me to enum, or this will say drop down. So the enum looks a little bit like this, and it will allow you to predefine the options you want the user to enter. The best example for this is sex. So it may be to a user could type M or male, and they really mean the same thing, but if they're stored differently in your data, when you go to search, they're not going to show up as the same thing. So this is when you should use the enum or drop-down field type. That way I can type M and add it, and I can type F and add it, and then when the user is entering this data, this is going to show up and only as a drop-down and only allow them to choose M or F. They won't have the ability to type whatever they want. So this is a great way to, if you have predefined values that you know are the user is going to be entering, drop down or enum is going to be the right choice. These can be changed later. Like I said, there'll be a video on how to change these things later on. But for now, this is what you can see. When you change them, it'll look relatively similar. All right, so let's try adding one. So let's change this to a number since we know amount is usually going to be a number, and I'm only going to add it to the test group, and then I'll show you what I meant by some of those errors. So I can add this field. So now if I go to test, and I click test group, and then I want to add amount, and I don't even need to put the units here, and I do a number, and I click add field, it's going to tell me that it already exists. We're not going to allow duplicate fields because then you end up with duplicate columns, and that doesn't really make sense when we're talking about data. So now what I can do is if I click test and I choose amount and then I choose text, and this will work since I'm adding it to a different group, even though it's the same name, it will allow me to do this. But if I want to add it to all groups, now we know amount already exists in the test group, so if I add it to all groups, it's going to require that things are the same. So it's going to tell me that amount already exists in a different group and with a different field type. So if I change this type to what we put it to, which was a number, now I can add the field, and it's going to tell me that it added it to one group and it skipped a group because it already existed in that group. And that could happen for 50 groups, it could happen for however many groups you have, but it'll skip the ones that are duplicate and add it to the ones that are remaining. And that brings me to the end of editing tables. The Help Center should answer many of these questions. and this is mainly revolves around the initial setup. But thanks for watching, and I hope you have a great day and everything is going well. Bye.